um, work, how people think like things work in the lab or on paper in actual practice.
Yes, I love it. And that'll actually tap in pretty nicely to what I talk about later as well. So thank you, Janae. Can we all give her a reaction from the Zoom? Lovely list of reaction boards. Now, Jackson, I see your hands clapping, which is fantastic, but there's a variety of updated Zoom options for reactions. So thank you, Janae, for your splendor, and Kate for doing multiple ones, Aaron as well. Fantastic. Great. Thank you. So today is our last lecture-based class, which is amazing to think about. We've gone through a number of weeks together, had a great variety of guests and lectures from ourselves as well. So we're excited to talk about this final um, opportunity to teach a bit on dissemination and implementation, and additionally pitching 101. So we're going to have some time to also see what a quick pitch would look like for an idea. So the one other thing we're going to be able to do today, prayerfully, we'll have some time to work with our groups. I'm going to have plenty of time to ask questions about your presentations, and again, hopefully we'll have some time to work with groups. So I'm going to try to keep a nice pace so that you all are understanding, but also to try to give you some time so that you don't have to work over the break to work with your groups, so that you could tie up some last minute things today. So Mario on Monday, again, who did a fantastic job with his guest lecture, really talked about this issue of bench to bedside. He talked about this average of 17 years that ends up in being this continuum of when you actually start this idea of basic research in a lab to when it's actually something that gets implemented out into the world. So we're going to talk about a variety of different stages today. This is one of them with T's that you'll see that looks at, again, this identification at TO. And then as it advances over time to T4, again, that takes about 17 years. So that's a problem. If you have an idea and you want it to get out into the world, that 17-year gap is quite discouraging to think about. Will that even be an issue in 17 years by the time it gets out into the world? The other issue is that it tends to impact a very small amount of people. So even if you are able to get that idea out there, you're really not targeting the amount of people that you may want to. And again, that could be because the problem doesn't even exist, or it exists in a different way. So as you all said, and as Janae said as well with the Kahoot, sometimes we have to innovate when we diffuse and when we actually get it out into the world, because it doesn't look the same as when we started it. Just to make sure that we're all on the same page with respect to terminology, dissemination is when we have a planned systematic effort designed to make a program or innovation more widely available to a target audience or members of a social system. Diffusion, which is one of the things that we talked about today. And again, admittedly, when Dr. Fleming came a few weeks ago, we had a hiccup because there are stages of change models and stage models. And so we had a bit of a hiccup as to what he discussed weeks ago, but he talked about this idea of diffusion of innovation, which is the outcome of those dissemination efforts. So I'm going to attempt to disseminate my work to make it more widely available, and how well it's been disseminated is what we consider diffusion to be. Implementation, on the other hand, is the use of a strategy to adopt and integrate evidence-based health interventions and change practice patterns within specific settings. So implementation is, and you'll see a bit later when I talk about my own work, when you have an intervention and you want to think about what it takes to get that out into the world, to implement it into different settings. So it can be a bit of getting it out and more widely available, which is part of the goal, but dissemination is more about the breadth and the width, whereas implementation might be more about depth. How many systems can I get it in, versus dissemination, how widely can it spread across the United States, for an example. So that's some of the terms that we're working with for dissemination and implementation. They are supportive, but not the same thing. So some of the things that we've already talked about, again, with Mario, and that the Kahoot has addressed as well with respect to why it's hard to disseminate and implement. The validity of something when you do it in a controlled setting, when there are all of the resources that you have, likely far more assistance and uh, resources and technology to do something internally versus when it actually gets into the world, when we're trying to generalize it, when resources are scarce, when the real world happens, when people have appointments and they miss what it is that you're trying to do for them. That's 101. So internal and external validity are hiccups like 101. It's so hard to get something that you may have shown really works quite well in a controlled setting in the actual real world, in the real world environment. Additionally, incentives and funding. So Taz and I had a bit of a back and forth on this in the chat last time, but you can imagine, I'll just talk about what we see right now as a challenge. You've got, again, an administration who has an executive order that's saying words like racism can't be utilized in federal funding applications. So again, this is apolitical. It is a statement that is something that's being mandated, that we can't utilize that language. But a lot of the funding priorities of some of the foundations, as an example, are really highly interested in racial work right now, given what's happened during the summer. So depending on where I apply, if I apply to a federal source, in this moment right now, I would not be able to get any funding, given that my work starts with the word racism, right? Like that's in the title, it's in the first word of what it is that I'm saying. That's going to get thrown out. But a foundation might be somebody that's giving me a pot of money because that's in their interest. But at the same time, I may not have sustainable or the same amount of money from that foundation. And it may not be looked at with such regard, with such high regard from a university standpoint. So University of Michigan wants me to bring home some federal funding, but again, my work can't get funded in this present moment. So that's with respect to incentives and funding. If I wanted to get money from the federal government right now, I'd have to propose something completely different from what I normally work on, given the priority and given the executive order. So that's an example of why it would be hard to disseminate and implement because it might vary from year to year or from quarter to quarter, at administration to administration, and your work may have to shift as a result. The last piece is that evidence might be lacking. So as we'll talk about these different T's or stages or phases throughout our conversation today, you may be challenged to find the same type of evidence in a different space. So if I do it in a lab setting and it works quite well, but then I try to move it to a clinic and the clinic doesn't have the same type of evidence, it can be really hard to then go to the next stage because I have to figure out why it didn't work there. And that again is what contributes to the 17-year gap. It takes a long time for these three things, just these three things that are on this page, to align so that it can go to the next step. So these are just some of the reasons why it might be hard to disseminate and implement. I'm not going to go through the next few slides in detail, but I wanted to do some screenshots of some of the things that you read so that you have it in one place. So this is a figure of factors that serve as barriers to dissemination of evidence-based interventions. And the main takeaway, these constructs that are being shown here, are that intervention characteristics have an impact, the situation of intended target settings have an impact, research design has an impact, and all of those things speak to interactions among other barrier types as well. So I'm going to just leave this here for you so that you can see some of the detailed variables of these constructs, but these larger ideas of intervention characteristics, situation of intended target settings, and research design play a role in those challenges to dissemination. Likewise, I'm sorry, a lot of stuff is being covered up by this bar at the top. So this is the type of evidence and associated strengths and weakness. So again, you can see some of the elements to the left, like cost, like internal validity, et cetera. You can see why that would be a strength to the work that you would want to conduct, or a weakness. So again, I'll just park these here, but it was part of your readings just so you can have them in one place, showing what the challenges are to dissemination and implementation. They're quite varied and quite a number of challenges associated with these factors. So what I want to get a sense of from you all is a question that comes up quite often. It's something that I'm going to also argue in my talk later today. So I want to get a take from you all whether we should use the best available evidence or wait until the best possible evidence is available. So in the chat, go ahead and mark a 1 for the first statement, whether we should use the best available evidence or wait until the best possible evidence is available for a 2. So let me see what you all are thinking. Okay, lots of ones coming through. And then it depends and always evolving. 1, but it depends. Alex, can you chime in and tell me why it depends? So I see your 1, but it depends. Tell me a bit about why you would say that.
I would say that because if you, sorry, did I
No,
cut?
go ahead. Go ahead, Mohammed. Go ahead.
I would say because if you don't use the best evidence, you have to do something. People might not think that you're not going to do anything, and then if they lose trust in you that way, then that's a huge barrier that you have to overcome later.
That's a great point, Mohammed, and one actually that I haven't heard before. So thank you so much for bringing that up. That's really helpful. Alex?
Yeah, I think it just depends on like the risk of having the wrong information. So like the mask thing at the beginning of this pandemic, when the initial discussion was not wearing a mask, it's not gonna harm people to start wearing a mask. If like that's very low risk in my mind versus like a vaccine. It needs the best available. We should wait until we have the best vaccine. And then even that depends, because it's like, well, a vaccine that's 80% effective could be also good, even if in the future we can get a 90% effective vaccine. And then, sorry, going back to even like my mask example, at the very, very beginning of the pandemic, when we were worried about mask shortages, the risk of people wearing masks before we knew that they were helpful was a risk of healthcare practitioners not having enough masks. So I think like it depends on the risk of doing something that's either not quite right or doing something that's actively wrong. And that like depends on something as simple as wearing a mask versus maybe injecting millions of people with something.
Yeah, great point, Alex. Thank you. So thank you, Mohammed and Alex, for bringing up those varied points. Would anyone want to expand a bit on their 1, why they think that we should use the best available evidence, period? What's the thought there?
I gave a 1 because I was thinking of like if we use the best evidence that we have available right now, then we can start acting on that evidence. And I was thinking of it as like a continuously using the best evidence that we have right now and continuously acting on that current evidence.
Yeah, great point, Lauren. So you all are reading my mind with respect to why this is so relevant, especially right now. So I just brought in this news clip on, it was Pfizer and now Moderna has been added to that. So I made this slide last week, but Moderna has now been added to that as well, where we're getting these 90 or close to 95% effective treatments. But can folks recall why there was even a delay in some of this in the first place? Do folks remember if there was something that happened perhaps last month for this delay?
Did someone pass away from one of the studies? I think it was AstraZeneca.
Yeah, so thanks, Shiva. There was an adverse event. So if you're within a lab setting and you've ever done an IRB or like a clinical trial, sometimes they ask about an adverse event or a severe adverse event in the case of death. And in one of those trials, there was a death. Was it related directly to the vaccine? That's what they needed to figure out before they, again, to Lauren's point, or to both Alex and Lauren's point, distributed this to millions of people, right? And so even if you do have something that's highly effective, the question is the risk. And I love that point that was brought up. What is the risk of something that could be really great for the vast majority of people, but even if it's one person that we need to investigate, what could that harm be to that person? And especially in the case of death, that's a severe adverse event that can really impact although small, those people's lives, right? And we're trying to protect life, and yet some of these solutions might actually be leading to death. So all of these things that you're bringing up are fantastic points. We want to use best available evidence, but there is an asterisk. It does depend on what that risk or what the consequence or the opportunity cost of utilizing that best evidence is. So great thoughts there. So some of the things that we would want you to take away from D&I. Again, I think Mario did a fantastic job, and I'm grateful. I cut out quite a few slides that he already covered quite well. So some of the things that if you're to walk away from D&I and what are the things that you should know? The first is that D&I does not occur naturally and spontaneously, even when interventions are effective and they seem appealing. So if you do something really well, again, in a smaller setting, a pilot, it can be challenging to get it to that next level because it really takes quite a bit of energy and time. So even something like what I'm doing with Embrace, I love it to pieces. It's my heart and soul. I put a lot of energy into it. But when we train folks out in the community, will it be as effective when we start to dice it up and create computer-based modules and some people are watching Netflix, while they're supposed to be watching the training? Is it going to be something that has fidelity? Is it going to have the same type of outcomes? Likely not. So it's not natural, it's not spontaneous. It takes a lot of hard work to disseminate, again, to spread it wide and to implement or to get it deep into systems. Even when the intervention sounds nice in theory. Something that we've been talking about, hopefully since day one, that you're picking up on is that theory and frameworks are useful for guiding D&I. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to try to teach D&I before we talk about frameworks or theories, because in essence, you wouldn't know why we need or what is guiding our use of the strategies that we're even talking about. So when you're creating an intervention, when you're thinking about how do we get it out into the world, if we're creating a prevention, any of those things that we're trying to do out in the world, the question is why? Why would it work? Why would it be effective? And hopefully the theories and the frameworks that we've been learning about to this point are helping you to even think about for yourself when we're creating our group projects, when we're thinking about the interventions that we're going to say are going to help our Detroit population. Are these based on the theories that we've been learning about in class and the frameworks? And of course, the goal is, yes, that you're going to be learning from how to do these interventions based on what we've been learning about thus far. 1 and 3 kind of speak the same language, but this passive approach to D&I is ineffective. So if you're not working diligently towards getting it into various communities and to larger trials, then it's not going to be something that is effective. It's not going to, again, spontaneously or naturally happen. So 1 and 3 are fairly similar in that way. The last few takeaways are that stakeholder involvement in research and evaluation processes is likely to enhance D&I. So one of the reasons that we even talk about CVPR before we talk about D&I is that you can have the best intervention on the face of the planet. If you come into a community like Detroit and you don't have stakeholders who are speaking the language of the people, who understand the behaviors of the people, it's not going to work well at all. So you really have to think about who your partners are, who are those folks in the community that are going to buy into what it is that you're doing. Or in the case of even the vaccines, there have been a lot of conversations, especially if you're listening to radio stations geared more toward, say, Black listeners. When those trials were coming out and there was a push to try to get folk of color in those trials, there was a huge pushback from community members saying, we're not going to get involved in this. Like, we know about Tuskegee, we know about all of these things that have happened historically. We're not going to jump on board. So again, really understanding why might it be problematic to say we want folk of color in this study if you're also not saying it would be a representative sample and we want folks across the board, so that when we're disseminating this vaccine to a lot of people, we know that it's going to work well for all these groups. Like, how can you say that effectively, again, with this historical memory that people know and are keenly aware of some of the research struggles that have happened in that community? So 4 is incredibly important, really helpful to understand those CVPR strategies to work with communities. And as we've continued to say for this class, you should really be mindful of your specific audiences. So I just gave a preview of that in 4, but it oftentimes a one one-size-fits-all approach is not going to reach everyone equally or fairly or with the same type of effectiveness. And so you really need to be thinking about, for whom is this going to work? And who am I talking to so that they can uptake it, right? So again, is your intervention or is your strategy going to only go to a specific audience? And if so, how can you talk to them? And then if someone is in the power and control of needing to perhaps disseminate some of those strategies to that population, how do you talk to them? So this is really in step with what we're going to be doing for our presentations in the coming weeks, to know about who you have to talk to, what's the language, how do you get those strategies into the right hands. Oh, sorry, one more there. So something that we've talked about even in the Kahoot. So at the agency level, D&I approaches should be time efficient, consistent with that organizational climate, culture, and resources, and within the skills of staff members. So if something is too complicated, if you're trying to create a system that is so foreign to what people are already doing, or requires them to learn a whole nother skill set, requires them to spend more time to learn it, the likelihood of them doing that is going to be slim, and that is going to impact the product. So if they don't want to take it up as providers, it's going to be really challenging to get that outcome that you want for your client. So just being mindful of, how do you make it easy for everyone to get involved, to get excited, to get energized by the work that you're doing, rather than seeing it as a burden. Okay, some of the future directions that are really important to implementation and dissemination are listed here. So funding, I'll continue to say, is a huge issue with dissemination and implementation of certain things. There are clearly going to be incentives for folks working on things like the vaccine right now, where it's important clearly for everyone to have a shot at life, right? So if folks want to be able to overcome this airborne virus, that a vaccine is one of the strategies that people can utilize. Funding toward that then is going to be clear. But being mindful of what it was that I already told you about the executive order with funding of stuff that I'm working on. Last year for this same talk, I was bringing up, and I'm sorry I forgot to screenshot it this time, but there was some findings that came out about a year ago that talked about folks who are of color, or Black in particular, so Black scientists who especially talk about Black related issues, so community engaged work, CVPR strategies, working with community partners. They were so much less likely to get funded by the federal government than other people. It's oftentimes because who's in the room knows certain people that they want to fund, but they also might look down on some of the work that some of us are doing because they don't see it as rigorous as other approaches. So the funding is a huge part of that, and who's in the room to make those funding decisions is a huge part of that as well. With respect to rigor and relevance, it's important for us as the researchers and the practitioners to do that tough work to make sure that it's a good quality product that we're putting out. So that's something that we have to continue being skilled at. Collaborating is something you're going to continue hearing me say. How can we work across groups and organizations to get the needs of the people met? And then again, back to that last slide, if we can't create trainings or strategies for practitioners to uptake what it is that we're doing, we're never going to get the product out there. So it needs to be really streamlined and less complicated for folks. So yep, go ahead.
Okay, can I ask something about like what the presenter said last class?
Mm-hmm.
And also to like that point, it kind of like confuses me, like not confuses me, it's expected, but like the people that are in the room that are giving funding, are these people like, they're public health people, correct? Are most of the time, are they public health like practitioners?
It can depend. So it would take a little longer to describe, but I can certainly send a quick link out about this. When people are in the room making funding decisions, it's often people from a variety of backgrounds. So it'll be a large social science or public health group, but it's not it's not going to be 9 of the exact same type of trained people. These are folks coming from a large array of disciplines.
Okay, yeah, because I was just confused when when he was talking about like prestige and how like funding usually goes to prestige, which is crazy to me because if a community doesn't need prestige, they just need practical resources. I think it's insane that like they wouldn't get the funding, because that's the whole point of public health is to, you know, put the community first. So when I heard that, I was like, wow, that's kind of sad. And I wanted to know if like the people in the room were public health practitioners or not. But
yeah, it's the most important point, and this speaks to our presentations in the next few weeks as well, that there aren't ample resources. So not everyone's going to get money at all, right? So maybe 10% of anyone who applies to a federal agency is going to get that funding. But then the issue becomes, of that 10%, who are those people? And when people started to analyze that data, the who and then the what they're applying for are the things that they saw disparities in. So again, folk of color and Black folk in particular are among the lowest ranked folks in that room. And then the type of work that they work on, if it's racially specific or community oriented, that's something that typically doesn't get as high of a score. And it's because some people might think that their strategy, their training, their type of work is much more impactful than things that are community oriented or geared toward just one group. So again, happy to send out some more information on what that looks like to get people in the room, but it is, it reifies what we see in communities writ large or in the academy writ large, that certain people hold knowledge and certain people are the those with the power and the ability to make decisions. And again, that just gets passed down over time, unfortunately. Okay. Yes, and Janae just said it very clearly. So structural racism exists within public health, and it is absolutely just reified in all the things that are done in the world. So absolutely. Alrighty, so we talked a bit about fidelity in the Kahoot. Again, I'm not gonna spend too much time on this slide, but I wanted to just bring it into your ability to see it, that fidelity from a training perspective can really help to increase the opportunity for the work that you're doing to have a better success rate in the world. So when we implement it into different settings and when it gets disseminated across these different settings, it's going to be better if we follow these types of standards and protocols here. So again, just for your review there. And the last thing that I wanted to say from a, from a timing perspective, why are we talking about D&I before we talk about our presentations? Presenting is also a form of dissemination. So we've talked about op-eds, we've talked about a number of intervention strategies that you've already used throughout the semester. Presenting your work is a form of dissemination to get the word out there, to get people knowledgeable about it, so that if we wanted to share that information, we wanted to share those strategies, people are aware of it. So a very quick show of the presentation dates. We're just going in order, groups 1 through 14. So there's no rhyme or reason except just in order. And these are all random groups that have come together. Oh, sorry, I think that date might be a baby bit off. Let me just check. It's not, so that makes me a little nervous. I think, okay, I need to check when I have you all, when the submission date is for your presentations. It should have been on the 30th, and I think I may have accidentally put it on the 1st. The reason it's for the 30th is because we don't want it to be unfair that groups 1 through 5 had to present something that looks different from what you all would present on the 2nd or the 7th. So if I did make a mistake on that due date, I do apologize for that, but it should be the Monday of this presentation before any group goes, just to make it consistent for everyone. So let me check on that.
Yeah, Canvas says December 1st, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I remember seeing an update on that, so I apologize on that. I think I had changed it to help you guys out at one point, and then I changed it again to try to help you again, but I don't think I should have done it. So it should be November 30th. Again, apologize for that, but it's to make sure that it's consistent for everyone. So every group, I know that there was some confusion on Monday's call as to what your group number was. So you should know what your group number is, because that'll dictate when you all are presenting. So this is also on the in-class assignment sheet. So no worries on necessarily writing it down right now, but you may want to jot down what you think your group number is and when your presentation is going to be. Okay, as a reminder, your presentation should be 10 minutes per group. I wish that we could have more time, but we have a lot of people in the class this year, so it just means that we have a little bit less time per group, and 5 minutes for questions. So part of your ability to present is how to respond to questions as well. So you shouldn't think of those 5 minutes as dismissive. They are really important to clarify to your audience what it is that they might have questions about. So we should really try to answer those questions with authority and with a sense of this being a part of your presentation. I would encourage you, as folks are asking their questions, to try to limit the length of time that you have for your answers, just to ensure that other people can ask questions if they have it. Sometimes people answer questions for the entire 5 minutes, and that might not be fair to folks who have additional questions. So try to limit your answers to about 60 seconds or so. Just a reminder that everyone in the group does have to say something, and you should try to space it out. So if you have about 10 minutes and 5 folks per group, try to give about 2 minutes or so to each person. But it is up to you. Everyone in the group does just have to contribute in some way. We do know that there are some special circumstances where some folks may not be present on the call. For those groups, we have suggested maybe a quick video, or if it's a case where you are absolutely unable to contribute, we'll work that out. Don't worry about that. But for all of those who are able to, everyone should say something within the group. I would encourage your use of PowerPoint. Prezi gets a little funky sometimes, and not everyone might be used to that. PowerPoint is something that's tried and true on Zoom. So we would just want to minimize the amount of challenge that's in front of us. So definitely use PowerPoint. If you want to use a different format, just test it out beforehand. That would be my advice, because it's once the clock starts, it's going to be your 10 minutes to present. And again, I jacked up here. So I do apologize again about that. All slides are due 11:30, November 30th by 11:59 to Canvas. So we can't make changes again, just so we can be fair to the groups that are going that first day. I would appreciate everyone's attendance as much as possible. So we're saying that's a part of your grade. Clearly, again, this is, we can't mandate that, but this is just really being courteous to everyone to be present and listening to their presentation so that you can give them your vote and your tally as to how you think that they perform. So please do your best to attend all the presentations. And if you can, please put your camera on. It can be daunting staring into a sea of black boxes. So they want to see your smiling faces. They want to see your room looking disheveled. They want to see Yasmina in bed. They want to see all these things. So just have your camera on so we can see all that goodness. So again, this is on the rubric, pretty detailed, but what you want to do for your actual presentation is to discuss the components of your pitch, including the background of the problem. That can be very brief because you've already told us a bit about that in your paper. Most people already know why it's important to wear a mask, so that can be a very brief background statement there. Your target population can also be brief, but just be clear. So some folks have asked if it can be, for example, youth in Detroit. Absolutely. Tell us, who it is, tell us why it would be important for you to target them, and then let's move on from there. So those first two components should be a pretty brief introduction of your background and target population. The meat of your presentation is going to be those intervention strategies that you come up with. So what is the solution that you have that you're going to pitch to the Detroit Health Department? That includes briefly mention of your theory. So you don't have to teach us about the health belief model. You don't have to like go into super detail on what these things are. You say, in using the health belief model, we're going to implement this intervention of a Twitter thread of blah, blah, blah. So you mention it, maybe show a figure if you want, but you do not have to teach us about the HBM. Hopefully we have already done that and you've already been able to learn that throughout the class. So don't worry about going in detail on the theories. That's what your paper is for. And then again, thinking about your multimedia approach, if you're going to do a video, as an example, your 60-second video, that can be part of your 10 minutes and you can show us the video. If you're showing a Twitter thread, for example, maybe do some screenshots so that you can show, here are some of the things that we'll be using on Twitter, for example, and then you can read off maybe one or two just to give us a flavor of what that might look like. But you just want to be mindful of how you're going to put the various modes of media into your presentation. And I will note for the op-ed, because that's going to take time for people to read, you can indicate we're doing an op-ed, and remember that it has like 4 of those categories, right? So an intro, a body, your main points, and your ending. You can just give us an overview of what those 4 things are. And if you want us to have access to the op-ed, feel free to perhaps put it on a Google document or to like send out the attachment and like we'll read it later, but we're not gonna sit there and read that op-ed for 3 minutes. That would really suck for your time. So those are some of the content components. I'm gonna pause there and open it up to folks for questions. What are the things that I can help clarify with respect to your presentation? And then I'll do a brief presentation myself so that you can see what like a 10-minute presentation might look like. So what are the questions you all have about your presentations next week or the following week?
So, so if we have, like if we're using a a video as one of our media components, we would share the full video during our presentation, and that's a video less than a minute, of course, for that.
Yep. So yeah, I'm going to show you in my presentation like a 20-second clip of a 1-minute video just to save time. Mm-hmm. You could, in theory, say we have a series of, videos or a 5-minute video or whatever. I'm going to show you this amount today. So you can tell us just what amount you want to show. If you want me and Janae to see something a little bit longer, you can say we're only showing you this clip today. Like that would be fine as well. But I would recommend holding it to about a minute at the absolute longest to show so that folks aren't, that's not eating up your time.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other things I can clarify. Here's what I'll do. I'm gonna do my 10-minute presentation example. I'm gonna try to speed through it a bit so that it's not the full 10 minutes. So you'll have more time for yourself to work with your groups. Some of the things I'll actually present and some I'll annotate and say like, here I would do X, Y, and Z just so we can save some time. But I'm gonna show you an actual presentation that addresses dissemination and implementation. And this is the one that I did the day that we were talking to David, or that we saw David Williams on camera. And I'm so sorry, there was one more slide here for presentation tips. Again, focus on pitching the intervention strategies. This is just, I think, me restating it. So just be sure to acknowledge how your theory was used to inform it, but not focus on teaching us the theory and utilize your 10 minutes wisely. So we've talked about those points before. Okay, so here are some ways to design your slides. Just a quick overview here of a visual depiction, right? So you can see something very clearly. 1 in 4 people experience financial burden with out-of-pocket healthcare costs. So you get that nice visual just so people can kind of get a sense of what, excuse me, that slide is about without having to read a lot of text. And again, I'll show you some slides in just a bit for my own stuff. You just want to make it attentive for folks. So make it something that's very visible and clear, like we did with the picture from the last one. This one is pretty boring. You're going to lose folks pretty quickly. We're also using a lot of acronyms like SES and Southeast United States there, so you don't want to use that. And one word bullets are not as helpful as a phrase. So if you had 3 or 4 words that help us to understand what's going on, that would be something that I would recommend rather than 1 word or rather than a full paragraph, right? So striking that balance would be helpful. But for this slide in particular, you want to jazz it up a bit. Here, a series of questions. If you don't have any information on the slide itself, then you're going to be talking the whole time and people are going to have to grab the words that you're saying from out of the air to make sense of it. So you want your slide to have just a few words that help us to understand who it is that you're talking about or what the strategy is, versus just having things like a list of questions that people are going to have to really listen intently for what it is that you're talking about. So here's a quick actual presentation on some D&I strategies, and hopefully this will be helpful. So let's rock out with this. All right, so today we're going to be talking about truly reimagining a system of care. And we have to start with one quick question. So if we seek to truly reimagine a system of care through behavioral and public health approaches, we've got to first ask ourselves a bold question. Are we aiming to habituate or innovate? So do we want to stick with the status quo, or do we actually want to move the needle somewhere? We've got this NIH stage model that most of you are very familiar with, and in a lot of ways, it allows for innovation. It shows that we can go across stages. It's not linear. It's something that gives us the ability to move when we need to. But these cautionary lines that are in between let us know that it's not encouraged. So we're still supposed to follow this pattern from stage 1 all the way to stage, or from stage 0 all the way to stage 5. But the authors are telling us that we have to be cautious when we do that. Instead, I would argue that we need to take bold approaches when we have good evidence to give something a shot. You've seen this slide before, so now I'm taking this hat off. So you've seen this slide before. What I would be doing as this slide is popping up, I'm talking about the importance of knowing these outcomes associated with this predictor. So this is showing the audience, I know my X, I know my Y, and I know a host of things that are happening in the middle. So I know my stuff is pretty much what this slide is suggesting. Okay, here I'm going to annotate this as well. So what I'm talking about on this slide is that there are problems that in the world that require a systemic solution. And then I bring in a quote. So this is a really cool way, again, of using animation so that you're giving the audience a bit of what it is that you know on one side of the slide, and then you're bringing in what an expert has said, David Williams, on the other side. I was hoping that he would see that and say, like, that was really cool, but he left the call by the time I said this. Anyway, so you're able to tease the audience a bit with the things that you know, and you bring in the expertise of what other people say. So if you have folks in the community who you've gotten quotes from, for example, this is a really cool way of saying, we know that this is important. Here's what someone from the audience or from the population says about that. So you can kind of showcase what the problem is and how people are talking about it. I do that again here with another quote from the late James Jackson about how scholars try to fix communities without acknowledging the functioning of those same communities. So I'm bringing in, again, what the scholars are saying, what the experts are saying, and what the problem is all at once. So here, and I got through all of that stuff very quickly at the beginning. So that's your introductory stuff. Then I'm going straight to the proposal. So at this point, I'm starting to pivot to what is it that I'm asking people to get from this. So how do we create stopgaps in the meantime? I ask the question, but then I answer it. So you see those answers that are underneath it. You got to consider these 2 structural and interpersonal systems. We have to uphold the cultural strengths and strategies already being undertaken. And we have to capitalize on what's going on with COVID-19 right now and racial uprisings as a turning point for what it is that we can do in the future. So we know that empathy for BLM support is at an all-time high right now. We need to take advantage of that. So in the same way of what we're doing for COVID, we have to expedite clinical trials for this virus, the virus of racism. A potential vaccine for racism is the talk. So then I talk about racial socialization, what it is, and why that's a strategy to combat racism. So these are my solution slides here. Why does this thing work? So now that I've set this whole story up for you, why does what I'm proposing work? Well, here's this theory. So again, this is where you would be bringing in, we know that theory tells us this. So here's this theory that I've already talked with you about. I would walk you very quickly through this theory and say that, again, that's a quick slide. Like I'm posting it. That theory is now applied to this knowledge in this way. So I move you very quickly to this next slide of how do we apply what it is that we know from this theory to what it is that I'm proposing. Here's the intervention. So I take the theory and I kind of showcase, here's where I would intervene with my intervention. And here's why I think that it would impact some of those things. So you're not going to use your theories in the exact same way. This is really specific to recast because embrace maps on very nicely to that. But at this point, you might say that the HBM teaches us to tap into someone's self-efficacy, and self-efficacy in this way might be best displayed in this type of strategy that you show us on a video or something of that sort. So again, I would take my intervention and map that on very closely to what it is that we know works from this theory or this framework. And my favorite part of all time is when I think about, and my lab helped me to think this through, how on earth you can utilize something like multimedia to show what it is that you want folks to understand about your work. So in this case, what we've been talking about is how racial socialization is like the costume of the Black Panther. And so here's what we would do to showcase that.
Hey, look at your suit. You've been taking bullets, charging it up with kinetic energy.
Put around the truck. Where'd he go?
A show off.
So in this way, the suit has been utilized to charge up with the kinetic energy, the things that have been launched against it from the outside world. In this case, the Black Panther took up that energy or the messages that have been given to this young child and is able to create changes in the system. So it impacts the car, impacts the road, impacts the things around it to say, you're not going to enter me, you're not going to impact myself. I'm going to put it back into the world. So that's one of the ways that we in our work describe what it is that racial socialization and racial discrimination do. And I'm sorry, that shouldn't have ended there. Do to a child. So to finish up, what we would do to consider for innovation, again, these are the things that we've already talked about even today, but funding, we have to earmark money explicitly for later trials for the community-based settings. We have to create mentorship models. And again, I'm saying these things and it has just a few points underneath it so that folks can listen to me and read. But mentorship models help to create connections between those working towards solving the problem at different career points. So an early person like myself and folks who are later in their career. And then also thinking about scholars in varying phases of the model. So maybe there's a person working on basic science, maybe there's someone out in the lab, maybe there's someone out in the community. Putting those folks together on teams can be really helpful as well. And most importantly, we need to act now. So COVID exposed the fault lines and it's only going to continue to fissure. And so we have to make sure that we're working together through all of these different mechanisms to make change for our communities. And then I would say, get in touch with me, and then I would end that presentation. So that is a super quick depiction of what a presentation might look like using different media, using different slides. So now again, we have about 20 minutes. Are there any questions that I can answer with respect to your presentations in the next 2 weeks?
So you used a video in your example kind of to help through the presentation talk, but
Yes.
our media that we're including with our presentation are specifically things that we are proposing to implement as a way to promote mask wearing.
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
And you've seen me do that before with stuff like with our mental health minute. So you've seen me use videos before. You would be doing the exact same thing. And again, yours were fantastic. All the ones that you all submitted were just great. So any 60-second clip will be really, I think, well done. One more question. Okay, I'm going to move on, and I'm hoping that means that you all are just super stoked and excited about your work and you feel very confident in it, and not that you're so confused and frustrated that you don't want to talk to me ever again in life. So, all right. I know that we've been kind of jumping over our exit tickets, but I want to make sure that we close out the semester with one last ticket from you all. So for today, what's one thing that you learned? Feel free to drop it in the chat or to come off mute. What's one thing that you're taking away from today?
I just in general understand IND a lot better than I did previous to this lecture. So that's what I'm taking away.
Thanks, Lauren. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right, for number 2, how can you apply anything that you've learned today to your own life? Checking out the chat. Oh, Carly says presentation examples and expectations and examples. And IND stuff to finish up the op-ed. Fantastic, great to hear. And I've asked 17 times now, but if you need any more clarity for your presentation, feel free to either drop it in the chat or to come back after class so that we can talk it out. Here's something that would be helpful to know. As you know, let me stop the share here. As you know, we would have to jump over to another Zoom to be able to work with your group. We've got, I can either, would you like to jump on the other Zoom so that you can break out with your group? Would that be helpful? Give me a thumbs up on the reactions if it would be helpful to jump out with your other group. Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up. Here's something that I'm going to indicate very quickly. So on the in-class assignment Google Doc that we have, I did put the link there. For whatever reason, when we've been going over to the other class, some people haven't been able to get it, which is odd to me because I stay on here until the last person is off. But that Zoom link is on the in-class assignments in case you don't get it when I put it in here. So I'm going to drop it in the chat. I enjoyed that too, Jackson. That was a great point that Muhammad made as well. Okay, so I'm dropping the link in here. I'm going to stay on until everybody goes over, but in case you don't get it or in case your classmate doesn't get it, it's on the in-class assignment sheet highlighted in green. So I'll meet you over on the other Zoom in just a moment. So James, are you still with me?
Yes.
Okay, what I'm trying to say is by noon of Monday. So I have to change,
class.
Yes, I have to change 11:59 p.m. to a.m. So it should be noon Monday.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Alex, you still with us?